Good afternoon. It's great to be here. We're pleased to get to talk about this campaign and how I think anyone can build a campaign and build change. So No Coal, No Gas is a grassroots organization trying to build grassroots power, trying to find people who are ready to take action and help us all get connected and build the skills that are needed to participate in direct action to end coal and gas. Particularly, we're focused on the Merrimack Generating Station, which is in Bow, New Hampshire, which is the last coal burning power plant in New England. There was one in Connecticut that closed down a year or two ago. There was another one in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which shut down during the pandemic. Some of you may have grown up in communities where there was a coal plant burning that has shut down since then. Do any of you know if you grew up with a coal burning plant in your neighborhoods? One of my co-workers grew up near a coal plant and has asthma because of it, and is really clear about the risks of coal, from very immediate personal health risks to the climate risks, which is what No Coal, No Gas is working on, particularly, but we're aware that every issue is connected to everything else, and that shutting down the coal plant in New Hampshire is connected to all of the liberation and justice work that is happening in the world now. So I think that the complexity of all of that liberation work will show up as we talk through the campaign. So the campaign really got started in 2019 with a large direct action. And that's when we announced the goals of the campaign. So I've said we wanted to shut down the coal plant in New Hampshire, but the first campaign goal is to build community, which means for the people who are participating in the campaign to know each other well, to trust each other, to have spent time with each other, learning together, knowing that when we learn together, that's when we're both powerful and open-hearted, which is, I think, really useful thing to talk about in a learning community like yours. And it's that kind of being open-hearted and always in process and aware that we're always figuring out how to do this work together, that means that we can work together in really powerful ways. And that's the first goal of the campaign, to build that kind of community. The second goal of the campaign is to show people what's possible. And sometimes the people who are being shown what's possible is we ourselves who are doing that work. When we do that kind of learning and take action together, it reminds us that it is possible to change things, that it is possible to meet the power structures as they are right now and say, no, this is going to stop. What you're doing, how you're affecting the world is going to stop, and we're going to put our bodies in the way of what you're doing. And that reminds us that it's possible for change to happen, but it also means that people who see the actions that we take and who hear our thinking about it can also be inspired and see that something different is possible in the world, both about a particular coal plant and about how people are with each other. And our third goal is to shut down the coal plant, to have it stop burning coal. And one of the reasons that we said no coal, no gas is that many coal burning plants get converted to burning gas.
And we think that sucks.
Just to be very clear about that. Yes, it does. And I almost said natural gas, and I'm learning not to say natural gas, but to say fracked methane gas, because natural gas, right, makes it sound like it's natural. It's fine. It's not. It's fracked methane gas, which is tremendously harmful to our climate. So those are the goals of our campaign, kind of in that order, even though we say we're going to shut down that coal plant. So the goals themselves, I think, bring up a little tension. And so I will hand it over to Isaac.
So when we talk about building community and showing what is possible, and also about like making sure that a piece of fossil fuel infrastructure shuts down, what we are doing in order to achieve those goals is creating tension. We have here a really classic quote. I think you like it's pretty classic to start out a discussion of a direct action oriented campaign. Is Dr. King says that there is a type of constructive nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth, and that we who engage in nonviolent direct action are bringing to the surface the tension that is already alive. So the tension between survival and corporate profit off of fossil fuels already exists. And when we take action, we are revealing it. It may feel like we are creating a new or heightened situation, but that is really a distilling of the situation that is already there. And what I think is also crucial in about sort of the three goals that we operate around is that when you have something in tension, that is part of a larger structure, you often have something that is both something that is being pushed apart and something that is being pulled together. Forgive me if you are actually a person who does engineering, because I'm not. But right, when you have tension, something that is being pulled apart, you generally in that larger structure also have compression. The things, or in our case, the people who are being unified, drawn together around that larger goal by or in the process of heightening the tension or distilling the tension of the situation that we are in, where, you know, corporate profit off of fossil fuels is killing people. The three sort of elements of that tension that we're going to talk about in relationship to our campaign, and I think in relationship to, you know, activism in general, because it's really one of the things that I'm really passionate about is the sharing the ability to not take action at random, but to take an action and then think about how you can connect it to the next one in a way that builds on itself and creates a campaign. So the three things that we're looking at here are power and pressure and culture, and the way that those three things combine to create that tension. A really classic breakdown of what we mean when we say power in NVDA is that there are 4 types of power, and that we are trying to move the world and also our own selves away from a world that is based in power over and towards structures that are based in other types of power. So power over meaning domination, control, systems of oppression. But we have the ability to counter that power with these other types. We have power 2, skill, ability, know-how, learning from each other, the knowledge that we can gain collectively. We have power with collaboration, cooperation, power in numbers. And then we have the power within, which is the term that we use for the center inside yourself when you have the moral clarity, the integrity to act on it, the ability to see options when you are only presented with a command, and the both ability and willingness to assess the risks around you and decide which ones are worth taking. And to be clear, like, not every risk is going to be worth taking in any given moment. And that's why we have things like power with the people around us to prevent one person from ever having to take on all the risk. But yeah, so for example, this is sort of the beginning of our campaign timeline, which has some actions that I think go well with some of these different types of power. In summer 2019, we started out, this was before I was involved, but I'm just going to continue to say we because otherwise I will get confused. We started out by announcing ourselves and our campaign. Some folks went and liberated some coal from the Merrimack generating station. They went in with shovels and buckets, and they took coal out so that that specific amount of coal would never be burned. And then they took some of it and they dumped it on the steps of the New Hampshire State House to say, here we are going to prevent this coal from being burned as much as we possibly can, and eventually we are going to shut down this coal plant. A couple months later, we had this action that Kendra referenced earlier. The first one was really, to me, like an example of that power within, like just a couple of people really feeling centered in themselves and willing to go and shovel a bunch of stuff into buckets and carry it out, feeling grounded in their purpose. We had this action of, I think, 60 or 70 people together publicly attempting to do the same thing a couple months later, which is really a move towards that power with, power together, building a more massive collection of people, and then after that, seeing what can we do together. So we called that bucket by bucket, and then we said, all right, we're going to stop this coal from being burned train by train. And that winter, the coal plant was resupplied by coal arriving in trains from West Virginia. And we conducted 5 or 6 coal train blockades. This to me was a phase where the campaign was really growing in our power too. We were really learning about new skills, new abilities. We were like, people were transferring onwards the like safety practices, the jail support practices, all of the things that you needed to know in really technical ways in order to pull off these kinds of actions that many of us had never done before. For example, like I showed up to that big action with the bucket by bucket, just kind of at random. There was a rally outside of it, and I was like, oh, I will go to the rally part. And the train by train blockades were where I really got involved. I really learned how to do things. And that was where I decided that this campaign was going to be part of my life. After that, the pandemic hit, and we started a we also like still in a sort of power two, learning what we can do, skills, shifted to doing a utility strike because we were not going and doing actions together in person. Kendra, do you want to talk a little bit about pressure or? I can keep going, never mind. All right. So the distinction that I think I'm making here between power and pressure is that pressure is being applied, right? Power can exist in any particular, doesn't have to have a direction. But once we are discussing pressure, that is being exerted on a, in action planning, we often call it a target. While we are doing direct action, doing what must be done ourselves for now, like you also want to consider like who can formalize a long-term solution. And in our campaign, like we have felt that these things go together. I think sometimes there are action spaces that feel like you should only do one or only do the other. And I think that that can be limiting. I understand why people would do it from a like skills-based perspective, right? Like this is the group that is skilled in this part and this is the group that is skilled in this part. And so we might have a division of labor. That makes a lot of sense to me. But I think like it's important to me that we understand these things as like parts of a whole, where we can make them work together, even perhaps at the times where we might have a little facade of, oh, wow, those direct action radicals over there, we're the polite people, you could talk to us, we'll have a solution. And then really be working together more so than that. Anyway, so you want to think about when you're considering the people who can formalize a long-term solution, what do they want? What do they value? And not just what do they say that they value, but what do their actions show that they want or value? Because unfortunately, the people who are holding together systems like, you know, or the systems themselves, like our electric grid operator, or like a hedge fund corporation that owns the company that owns the power plant. Like these people are not actually committed to their environmental principles that are stated on their website, and quoting those back at them may be entertaining, but it also isn't necessarily going to be effective. What we have found that these systems or folks tend to be invested in is profitable investments and having a reliable electric system and being able to conduct whatever they're doing in peace and quiet out of the public eye. So the actions that we have found to be effective with like pushing them to negotiate are ones that have impacted those things, where we've asked ourselves questions like, how does this tactic like demonstrate that the coal plant is already unreliable as an energy source and therefore make it a less viable candidate for the electric grid operator, or make it less attractive to investors. For example, this is not actually on this slide, but towards the end of about a year and a half ago, I think, one of the two hedge funds that was the company that owned the coal plant used to be joint owned by two separate investment firms, and one of them divested. They did this pretty silently. We only found out about it because we were, perhaps paying a lot of attention to their website to see what they might be doing. But like, this was after we had gone and like sent envelopes full of coal to people who were involved with making decisions about this, with little letters in them, to people who like are not elected officials, are not expecting to get mail about, are not expecting to be like, have it known that they are a decision maker about this, or even really to consider necessarily that they are an important person who could say no, forcing them to recognize their agency. Here's a picture where we went and left a whole wheelbarrow full of coal in front of our electric grid operator. If you bring this here, you should have to deal with it. Our campaign went on pause for a while to go do solidarity work against a pipeline in Minnesota that was going through indigenous territory. So that's what that is. I'm not going to narrate all of this, just for the sake of time. It's half past. You talk about the Connecticut meet and greets.
This meet and greet is when we went down to those hedge funds who own the coal plant. And we just walked into the offices, which they don't expect you to do. And which, if you're sort of following societal rules, you don't. It's in a very quiet, well-to-do neighborhood in a wealthy town in Connecticut. And it has a driveway, and it's very clear that if you don't belong there, you're not supposed to go there. But it doesn't actually say that. And so we just walked up there and we went into the office, which I could feel in my body that I was not supposed to be there, that the rules said I wasn't supposed to intrude on this space. But we, probably 25 of us, went together and together had the courage to cross that line. That's just a line that those are those rules about how we're supposed to participate that keep us from putting pressure on change makers.
Yeah.
So we went in the door and we asked to speak to the CEO. I'm not sure that the CEO was there that day. We couldn't know, but we did get a response. They were really upset that we had come into their building, but it was not, there's no reason that we couldn't walk into their building.
I think what the point of this is that it takes a lot of energy to willfully disrupt agreed upon power structures.
Yes.
Even if you are not breaking a law,
right,
or a rule, that like we're so well policed, even internally,
yes,
not to break out of those things, that it takes a lot to shift them. But that the counterbalance of that is that, like, when you do it, it can unexpectedly have a much larger impact than you expect. And that practicing your willingness to disrupt and your willingness to take joy and pleasure in finding ways to disrupt those systems is much more impactful than you think it is, especially perhaps if people you're associated with have garnered themselves a reputation for things like climbing the smokestack of coal plants that may perhaps help because you may have a reputation for being unpredictable and for them not knowing for sure what it is that you are going to do in their office. Sorry, Kendra, I interrupted you. Was there something else you wanted to say about that? Cool. All right. I think, yeah, what I am getting at here with pressure is just assess what they value, assess what societal rules you may need to disrupt in order to get access to them. And assess also like the risks thereof, but the understanding that the highest risk actions may feel like they would be the highest reward actions, but that's only sometimes the case. I think we are on a Kendra slide. We're going to talk a little bit about culture.
So we've heard some of the actions that we have taken in the world, and there's a really wide variety. And I think it's part of why this campaign is very successful is the huge spectrum of actions, from lots of people walking onto the plant to walking into corporate offices to participating in very bureaucratic process with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. In saying all of that is there's a comment process that we participate with that as well. So there's this whole range of ways that we keep putting pressure on people from all sides so that they just don't ever stop feeling it. But in order to do that, to keep having that kind of diversity of pressure, our campaign has to be really solid, or we cause ourselves harm because we're going up against really powerful structures. And so we have to really tend to each other and ourselves and the culture of our group. So I don't know if you are reading Emergent Strategy or other things. I'm probably 3 books behind on Adrienne Maree Brown. Have any of you read Adrienne Maree Brown? Oh, you have such a fabulous book waiting for you. She has many books. I recommend reading something. I'll have the same disclaimer that you had earlier about I'm not a mathematician. And Adrienne Maree Brown also says this, but she talks about being fractal, about how what happens on a small scale is what happens on a big scale, that they create each other and reflect each other and are each other. So how we are at the smallest scale is how we are at the largest scale. The patterns of the universe repeat at scale. So the way that we have conversations in this room is the way that we have conversations out in the world. The way that Isaac and I figure things out is the way we're setting a pattern for how things get figured out in society. So in our campaign, we want to be sure that the way we set up the culture of our campaign, the way we make decisions together, the way we meet the world is a small version of how we want things to go at large. If we want fossil fuels to end, the kinds of decisions and the way of interacting with the earth that fossil fuel companies have lived in, we want that to end, and we want this other way of being to come to life. So we have to be that in order to make it in the world.
Which is not to say that we are holding ourselves to some kind of standard of perfection, but rather that like the effort to not reproduce systems of domination within our work with each other, but rather to thoughtfully and creatively create care is what we are striving for, and how how it feels like the movement becomes sustainable rather than and like a source of energy rather than a drain.
Yeah. In fact, being perfect or trying to be perfect is one of those things that one of those cultural pieces we're trying to move out of the way, so that being perfect is no longer the goal for anyone, but to always be learning and figuring out how to be in contact and engaged is what we're going for, which involves necessarily making mistakes and then learning. It's one of my personal things that I have loved learning in No Coal, No Gas. Let go of trying to be perfect. And I think in a university setting, that's also a good idea to get to work with. What am I in the way of here?
Oh, just a shorter version of the concrete list of things that's on your piece of paper.
Yeah, right. I'll just move over here. I'm mindful that people on Zoom won't be able to read through my head. If you have had any interactions with direct action, with people who are doing things like climbing smokestacks or walking onto coal plant property, or have any of you participated or seen a direct action where people have done things that look risky?
Well, it's going back to these super people outline.
So you people went on to the site where the power plant was being constructed then as well. Did I see another hand? So when people do things like intentionally trespass to try to stop infrastructure from being built, or infrastructure from continuing to burn fossil fuels that are melting our earth, it looks really risky. And what we notice is the people who maybe get arrested. And in the picture that Isaac had up before, you could see the people carrying the coal buckets. And I carried one of those coal buckets, and that's what's on the news, is the people who physically cross that line, who then get arrested. And that's when you see the police, and they brought all the police in the state of New Hampshire, I think, to respond to us with our 5-gallon buckets.
But
in order for those 68 people to cross that line and have that encounter with the police, there were probably 200 or 300 people who were in support roles, who were ready to respond to getting people out of jail, who had done all this planning ahead of time, who made sure that the logistics were in place so that people could be there, who also kept saying, do you have everything you need? Are you okay? Are you still good with the decision that you've made to cross this line today? And as we took that action, we several times, many times, stopped and said, why are we here? Let's not just run on adrenaline. Let's remember why we're here. And we stopped and said, I'm here because I have a child who I want to live in a healthy planet. I'm here for the river. I'm here for the earth. I'm here for the whales. I'm here. People listed off. So we got grounded again in the deepest purpose of why we're there, so that it wasn't just because it looks good on the news. And we also checked in and said, are you doing okay? Are you feeling like, is your adrenaline so high that this isn't working anymore? Have you changed your mind? This isn't a risk that you feel like you can take today. Or does stepping back and being ready to support other people feel like the thing that's really hard and really a risk for you? Because different people have a different sense of what's risky and what's stepping into liberation work for them on any given day.
yeah.
And yes.
Can I say something about that? Like, often when we use the word risk in activism spaces, we're referring really specifically to the legal risk of something that you might do, right? Like, are you trespassing? Or are you in a place where you might be charged with a crime? regardless actually of whether or not you're doing something. And something that I've really appreciated about working with No Coal, No Gas is the emphasis on, like, there are many forms of risk that we take when we are involved in trying to change the world. There's reputational risk or social risk. There's emotional risk involved. There's the risk that comes when you dump a whole bunch of time into something and other parts of your life get deprioritized. There's financial risk for many people who like have to skip shifts or things along those lines. Like the law is not the only thing that is at stake. And so part of valuing support roles and part just of caring for each other is acknowledging that some things may feel more risky to some people than others do. And like, for example, there have been times in my life where I was already emotionally supporting so many people that like taking on an emotionally supportive role in an action felt way more risky to me than taking on something that might be more legally risky.
The other thing that our campaign really values, in addition to being really clear about all of the roles that are necessary for any action, is how much training and teaching and learning from each other is always part of what we're doing. And that we're always returning to that, understanding what we've chosen to do and how we're participating, that's a constant process. We don't use the word praxis in our campaign. But
no, it's a little heady to be using when you're like running around being like, where is the rope?
Which we did some of today. But it's a word that some of you may have encountered, and that's, we're describing what we're describing that, which is you do something and then you spend time learning from it and then you do something again, and it keep going around, and don't just like learn a thing one time and then just go until you run out of steam. We're aware that this campaign and all of this climate work has to be sustainable at the smallest level so that it can be sustainable on the biggest level. Okay, so these two actions, knee pool and the ballroom coup. I just love this name for it. This is the most bureaucratic interaction ever, and I just love that it's a ballroom coup. These two things are times when we interacted with the grid operator and the New England Power. I can't remember.
A sub body that relates to the grid operator.
It's like this very complicated, too many people.
If you want to see all the diagrams, we can talk later.
If you like diagrams, they're delightful. These are two times when we, as activists, we figure out a way to be directly involved in the structures and be in conversation and disrupt the conversation, but participate in the conversation at the same time.
The reason that I put these on the culture slide, other than the fact that I am putting this timeline in order so that it will make a little bit of sense, is that I think another part of our campaign culture is that we try to find joy and even like fun or delight in the ways that we create disruption. I think that along with doing a lot of care for each other, like that sense of like, what is an action that can be both strategic and playful for us is something that has really kept a lot of us going. and
Mhm.
prevented us from burning out. And I think that the ballroom coup action in particular really felt that way. There was a consumer body that that the grid operator did not expect anybody to come to. And instead we filled it up with over 100 people and elected a bunch of activists to the committee that runs that meeting, such that, including Kendra, such that now, whenever they have those consumer meetings, they get to set the agenda and decide what we're going to talk about and bring back to the grid operator as complaints. Which, like, is that going to win us our campaign on its own? No, but it's going to build a lot of like support base and awareness of all of the ways that our grid operator is messed up, and like really allow us to bring our complaints to them directly. Whereas when we started this campaign, they did not know that we existed, and we barely knew that they existed, and they definitely would not have wanted to speak to us or reply to us. So it's, I think, an indicator of the amount of power that the campaign has built over the last couple of years, and really felt like a celebration where we brought a whole bunch of people into their fancy dinner where they were expecting to have, you know, 20 industry guys in their suits and like maybe 2 women, and filled it up full of hippies from across New England who were, yeah, having a great time disrupting their process.
I'm going to tell one more story and then I'm
Okay.
going to hand it back to you to conclude us. These 2 slides next to each other are also delightful because this is the fancy ballroom downtown Boston where we did all of this. And this is there was one more train this past winter on solstice night, actually, that came through, and we stopped it. We stop it for a matter of hours, which costs the company a fair amount of money, which costs the people who are running the trains a fair amount of money. And it turns out that the railroads are tremendously profitable. And so to cause them a little bit of frustration about making money, it makes it more expensive to keep running fossil fuels around. So that's part of what we're doing here. But one of the people who's sitting on the tracks, it's hard to see because they do this in the middle of the night, so it's hard to photograph, is one of the people who got elected to this Consumer Liaison League. And he was live streaming from the track saying, we've stopped the coal train because we have to stop burning coal. We're saying, no, you have to stop coal. And I'm a member of this consumer liaison group who's part of the independent operator, the electrical grid operator of New England. And this combination is delightful for us, but it also puts a kind of pressure on the grid operator that either one of these actions by themselves wouldn't do. So we're, we kind of take delight in the tension that's in that. But it's also a really important kind of pressure to have both of those happening
At the
together.
same time.
Yeah. And I'll hand it to you to wrap it up.
Just a last note here. One thing we have in our campaign is called action agreements, which is just like a little set of written up things that are like, these are the kind of principles or ideas or concrete things that we're going to operate under while we are in a action space together. Some of them are very concrete things. They're about like how we are going to do railroad safety. This is a train action. And some of them are more about like how we are like agreeing to treat one another. But although our action agreements have been through a number of iterations, they always end on this. I will act from my heart and from my conviction and stay connected to that which called me here. And that, I think, is it is about that power within, which is such a, again, such a core component of staying grounded while existing amid all of the tension that already exists in the world around us, and while seeking to bring it to the surface in service of environmental justice and, in general, a better world. That's that.
We have time for questions if anybody has any questions. I'll get us started. You've also worked for 350, so you're not alone in this. I assume that there's some sort of ways in which different organizations are creating community together. And I was wondering if you might reflect a little bit about the ways in which No Coal, No Gas leverages other organizations that are sort of change makers in ways that sort of build community amongst yourselves, not just within yourself. And you don't have to stick to 350. You can talk about any organizations that you work with.
Right. So I work for 350 in New Hampshire, which is its own entity. But do you know what 350.org is? Is that a familiar organization for everyone? It's a 350.org is well, I guess it's an international organization that what is trying to end climate change. Is that how we say what they're trying to do? They're 350 is the parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, after which we have warming and therefore chaos in our climate. So, and we're at does anybody know the number? 420-ish parts per million now, which means that we're seeing the effects that we're seeing. So that's 350. 350 New Hampshire is a organization that's working on climate. So 350 New Hampshire has supported this campaign in a number of ways.
This campaign being No Coal, No Gas.
Right. Since 2019, maybe 18, I'm not sure when the planning started. But we certainly are partnering with lots of other organizations. And one of the things that we've started to do recently is look at, so the coal arrives in New Hampshire, but where does it come from? And what's happening in New Hampshire is connected to where that coal comes from. So we're building relationships now with folks in coal country to talk about where the coal comes from, how it gets started, and how our lives and lives in other parts of the world are affected by the same coal, just like we're all affected by the climate.
One other thing on that note, like, I think the primary way that No Coal, No Gas interacts with other organizations actually is that most people who are part of our campaign are part of other things. And that, like, No Coal, No Gas is not an organization. It's really like a loosely affiliated set of smaller groups of people. And many of those people might have their primary activism affiliation be something else entirely. And that's something that, like, I really enjoy and really celebrate, is that people come in and out and, like, bring us what they learned and take what they learned at No Coal, No Gas back to their other organizing spaces. So I think that's really the primary interaction.
I just want to say thank you for the talk. both of you. And my question is that last week, our speaker talked a lot about fatigue, and the different ways that fatigue can appear and manifest itself in work like your own. And I'm just wondering how, and I know you talked a lot about power and how you can gather and recognize your power and put it to use. But I'm wondering how you kind of recognize, interact with, and cope with that fatigue, maybe turn it around and turn it into something positive.
I'll start. You could start. One of the things that was really important for me when I first got involved in this campaign is singing. And when we walked onto the coal plant in 2019, we sang the whole way. And there's something about singing together and about, I mean, your bodies have to work in harmony to sing together, and having that kind of connection, really profound connection with the people that I'm working with, gives me the kind of both spiritual and physical energy to do what we're doing. So I think for me, most of the way to counteract fatigue is to make sure that I'm actually truly deeply connected to the people I'm working with, to what is most of value to me, to the earth. And that when I lose connection, then I get really tired, like really fast.
I have found, I think, that there's a big difference for me between like short-term fatigue and long-term fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
And if I have been fatigued for a while, I may need to take a break, but I also may need to think about, do I want to switch up what roles I am doing? Because it may be that like, I still want to stay connected to the work, but I just really need to do a different part of it. And thinking about like what specific actions or interactions are fatiguing me makes a really big difference to me personally. Like, am I tired of organizing, or am I tired of sending when-to-meets? And if I'm tired of sending when-to-meets, is that something that could be fixed with like some additional support or a structural change?